There were not any constraints at all, not even anything close. They changed the possibility of a landing once around abort and decided that they would switch to Ben Guerir because of it would be a better primary site if there are any problems. So the countdown clock is continuing, and it looks like everything is go for an on-time launch. 8:31 is the schedule. They're at 1 minute right now and counting.
Now being armed, which will flow water onto the mobile launcher platform at the rate of 900,000 gallons a minute, beginning at T-minus 16 seconds. The heaters on the booster joints are now being turned off.
A beautifully clear day at the Space Center. They had a few low clouds a little earlier, but everything with the weather is perfect this morning.
T-minus 33.
Countdown clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to failure.
We've had a hold. We do not know at this time what the problem is. We'll be standing by for word, but the clock is holding at T-minus 31 seconds due to a system failure.
And NTDSD, it's the LO2 outboard fill and drain valve. NTD to CMPL. Go ahead. It's LCC MPS 8. And PV9 outboard fill and drain closed power is off. It should be on. A recommendation? And NTD, we're in a no-go situation. We should have our open power, and we do not.
So at 31 seconds, they have halted the countdown. Liquid oxygen fill and drain valve, a problem with that. The clock made it down to 31 seconds, and that's where they are right now, trying to decide what they can do.
Let's do this to CMPS. Go MPS. Okay, with an LCC read, if we have the closed power on and the open position off, we can cycle one time and try to pick up the closed position, but we never picked up the closed power. Okay, in MPS, we have a message that we were blocked by a prerequisite sequence, GCL 18.
What has happened is the ground launch sequencer would not hand off to the orbiter's computers to complete the count because the liquid oxygen fill and drain valve was showing off when it should be on. An analysis of the problem has begun.
We've been holding 2 minutes. SDE, this is CMPS. We're going to make an attempt to cursor that valve closed. We've got the prereq set off. If this works, we should be in good shape. I copy. Proceed. Can it work?
We have 7 minutes of runtime available on the auxiliary power units. We've been holding now about 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
NTD, CMPS, the valve's closed. We're go.
There's the confirmation that we have successfully
you're in the
recycled.
The pickup terminal sequence MPS. That's affirmative, so we're go. We're in good shape. Okay, you have a go to proceed. GLS, pick up the count immediately. I copy. Mark. GLS is go for auto sequence.
All right, the clock has started again. Apparently the problem has been fixed with the liquid oxygen valve. Let's listen in as they count down the last 20 seconds.
20.
Sound suppression water system has started.
15.
T-minus 13 seconds.
10.
T-minus 10, go for main engine start. We are go for main engine start. T-minus 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
Mission Control, Houston.
Roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
The roll maneuver puts the vehicle in the proper launch plane. Guidance officer confirms a good roll maneuver. Engines now throttling back. The throttle down maneuver assists in reducing the aerodynamic loads on Discovery as it passes through the area of maximum dynamic pressure. Velocity now 1,200 feet per second. Discovery downrange 3 nautical miles.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
All 3 engines now throttled back up.
Go at throttle up.
Engines at 104%. The go at throttle up call signifies that all systems are performing well. All 3 auxiliary power units look good. Discovery's velocity now 2,300 feet per second and is downrange 8 nautical miles.
The long-range tracking cameras that you're seeing now following at 8 miles away from the Kennedy Space Center. A fantastic view of Discovery streaking across the sky.
RB separation.
And the moment everyone waits for, the solid rockets fall away from Discovery as it streaks toward space.
Discovery's velocity now 4,300 feet per second at a downrange distance of 35 nautical miles.
So 7 years and 2 weeks plus the problem we had with the auxiliary power unit 2 weeks ago that stopped the count at 4 minutes. A similar problem at 31 seconds this time, but not with the auxiliary power units. They had a problem with the liquid oxygen fill and drain valve that stopped the count automatically at 31 seconds when the ground launch sequencer, a computer, refused to hand over control of the shuttle and to the firing room, and it simply shut down the clock at 31 seconds.
Discovery 60 nautical miles away from the launch site.
So it is the beginning of a mission for astronomers that they have waited a long, long time for. 1 day from now, they will deploy Hubble. They will put it at the end of the robot arm out into space and prepare to release it. CNN's John Zaroa joins us now from the Kennedy Space Center. John, it was another one of those right to the edge of the cliff, and this time, instead of staying on land, they jumped to space.
Boy, it was a last second, we thought for sure. It looked like they might have to hold. You know, they run out of time with those auxiliary power units. They only had 5 more minutes left to go, and but they managed to manually close that or open that valve and get the proper sequences started again, and they were going. It certainly was a pretty launch. You were mentioning about the long delays. Well, there's no one who has waited longer for this mission than Bob Odell from Rice University. And Dr. Odell, about 20 years since the beginning of the Hubble project for you. What a feeling this morning.
Oh, this is marvelous. In a few minutes, we'll know the main engines have done their job. In half an hour, we'll know we're in the orbit we want to be, and then we're off and going for great science.
An interesting story that at first, after all the years in the program, there was some question as to whether you'd have time on the telescope, but your colleagues donated some of their time to give you the opportunity to use the telescope. That must be something you just can't wait for.
That has been the greatest reward I have received and heading the program for those 11 years. Is my colleagues actually giving up time so that I could be an observer too, and I can't wait.
Well, we'll be all waiting with you, I'm sure. Dr. Odell, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Well, Tom, it certainly is a happy moment, and it will be a much happier moment a day from now when Hubble is deployed, and then in a week or so when the first picture is sent back to Earth. Tom, a milestone here for NASA.
A major milestone. Once again, Discovery, a safe launch this morning. They are on their way to space. Columbia is now remaining on the other side of pad 39. It is scheduled to go about the 16th of next month, where they will put up another astronomy package. But right now, it is Hubble in center stage as the beginning of the search of our outer solar system begins. Let's back up a few moments now and take a look as the countdown clock continued after 31 seconds of being stopped and move forward after some hair-raising moments to get Discovery off the ground. And Daybreak will continue in just a moment.
Start. We are go for main engine start, T-minus 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
The process is a painstakingly slow one while the crew makes sure everything is well in space. On the ground here in Maryland at the Space Telescope Operations Center, another group of scientists is using their computers and their computer consoles to talk with the computers on board the Space Telescope itself. In a few minutes, the Hubble will be disconnected from the Space Shuttle's cargo bay and the power supply there, and it will have to operate on the power supply that's provided by the solar panels, which will be unfolding. There's about a 5-hour life on those batteries that are aboard the Space Telescope, so those panels have to come out and be just right at exactly the proper instant for this to all go well. Joining us to talk about the complexity of the telescope is Rick Machotsky. He's a NASA astronomer. Rick, this is a very complicated piece of equipment, and as I just pointed out, it's going to take a lot for this to all work like clockwork, which is what it seems to be doing right now.
Right, it's probably the most complex scientific spacecraft that NASA's ever launched. On the other hand, it's also the one with the most preparation in back of it. The most care has been taken with its development, and NASA's taken every precaution to make sure that things go right.
As an astronomer, what do you expect to see when they open up the aperture door a few days from now?
Well, the very first images won't be very sharp because the telescope has to be put into focus and all the instruments have to be tested out. In fact, the first couple of weeks will be mostly just engineering tests and very, very preliminary images. Of course, after that, when the detailed scientific and engineering test program is started, we expect to get very sharp images of almost everything in the universe.
Yeah, how is this going to compare to what we can see now from telescopes on the ground?
Well, the Space Telescope is superior in several ways. First of all, the images are a lot sharper. The atmosphere, as we all know, is rather murky and blurs and makes the stars twinkle. In space, the stars are very sharp and there's no twinkling. So all the images will be much sharper. Secondly, the Space Telescope can look in a wavelength band that the human eye can't see because the atmosphere gets in the way. The ozone layer blocks the burning ultraviolet light, which is good for us, but bad for astronomy. And so the Space Telescope will be able to observe in those wavelength bands that hasn't been done before. And finally, the Space Telescope has a suite of extremely high precision instruments that are in some ways superior to those on the ground, so it can obtain data that is just not possible in other ways.
Yeah, Rick, you mentioned at the beginning of our interview that the preparation that goes into this is so much more than has been done for any other science project that NASA has been involved in. And right now, up in the shuttle, Bruce McCandless and Kathy Sullivan are filling up drinking bags inside their spacesuits, but they're not in the spacesuits yet. It's the first time for that, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, NASA's never planned for an emergency before. In other words, this is such an important launch that NASA's taken out the extra insurance. The astronauts are trained to handle a wide variety of contingencies just in case something goes wrong. Hopefully one won't have to use this contingency, but...
if it happens, I guess we'll know about it in the next hour or two.
Right.
Rick, thank you for joining us today. Thank you as well. We'll continue to watch the situation here. Colleague Tony Clark standing by at the Johnson Space Center in Houston as well, so we'll keep you posted all day. John Holland, CNN Live, at the Goddard Space Flight Center. And at the lower end of the device would last for maybe 5 hours before the solar panels had to be deployed. But because of the 2-week delay caused by the problem with the Space Shuttle launch system a couple weeks ago, they were able to recharge these batteries so they have a little extra life. They can last for maybe 8 hours of useful time. What is about to happen in the next 15 minutes, some booms that are now stowed along the side of the Space Telescope will come down. It's already in the process of being lifted out of the cargo bay. So it's up from the cargo bay where it flew into space. These booms on the side will come down, and then about 15 minutes after that, maybe 30 minutes from now, motors, which are located down in this area, will come on, and the solar arrays themselves will begin to unfold. Scientists here are fairly sure that this will work without a hitch, but in case it doesn't, there are 2 astronauts, McCandless and Sullivan, who are standing by next to their spacesuits, their extravehicular activity outfits, as NASA calls them, ready to jump into those and go outside. They can do that with about an hour's notice, just in case some of this doesn't work correctly. After that is done, the huge communication antennas that are located along the sides of the telescope will be loaded up and pointed back toward the communication satellite. So there's a lot going on right now. The next 5 or 6 hours are critical to the successful operation of the Space Telescope, and people here are sitting on the edge of their seats waiting to see what happens next. John Holloman, CNN Live at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. All right, thanks.
Cameras in the payload bay, the color
On the edge of their seats waiting to see what happens next. John Holloman, CNN Live at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. All right, thanks.
cameras in the payload bay, the color camera, giving us a beautiful view of the Hubble telescope as it's lifted out of the payload bay using the robot arm. Steve Hawley grappled the telescope about an hour and a half or so ago. They did some checkouts. They put it on its own power. It's got about 8 hours of battery life. And so what we're seeing now is they're moving it to the low hover position. It's one of the early stages of what is a 6 hour plus deployment activity. They pull it up to a low hover position, put it up to a high hover position, then open up, unfurl the Hubble telescope solar panels so that it can operate on its own power from here on out. And that's the tricky part, is to wait for the solar panels to unfurl so that the Hubble telescope can operate off of its battery power. As I say, it's been an active morning for the crew of the Discovery. They've been taking photographs of the telescope as it's been moving out. Everything going very smoothly, the umbilical disconnected, and we've been seeing some spectacular pictures. What will happen then, as soon as it gets to the high hover position and the solar panels are unfurled, at a point around 2 o'clock Eastern time, it will be disconnected from the shuttle's robot arm. If everything is going according to plan, at that point, the shuttle will back 40 miles away from the Hubble telescope and kind of station keep, watch it for the next 48 hours or so just to make sure everything is okay. Norma?
Tony, will the astronauts have to take a spacewalk to try to help deploy that telescope?
If anything goes wrong with the deployment, as it is currently, everything's going smoothly, but if something should go wrong, if it should not disconnect, if the aperture door should not open, if the solar panel should not open, astronauts Kathy Sullivan and Bruce McCandless are standing by. In fact, they're in the middeck right now getting prepared so that there will be very little delay. If they need to go out and help the Hubble satellite, Hubble telescope be deployed, they'll be able to do it. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from the... It's extending just slowly, a little bit at a time. What the controllers at Goddard Space Flight Center ended up doing is overriding a computer limit on the solar panel opening, a limit that is designed to keep it from unfurling when it gets tense, when it gets too tight. They said that they think the limits on that may have been incorrect, and so they overrode that. And what is, in effect, the third time trying to open up the solar panel, by overriding that, the panel has been opening up. In the meantime, astronauts Kathy Sullivan and Bruce McCandless have gone in the shuttle's airlock. They are all suited up to do a spacewalk if necessary. They just started depressurizing the airlock so that they could get out, do a spacewalk, and open up the solar panel manually if necessary. But right now it looks like that solar panel is opening up on its own and that a spacewalk may not be necessary. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from the jump on the part of astronomers from around the world. Now, as we can see in graphics that NASA is providing, there are now 2 objects floating around separately. They are the Discovery Space Shuttle and the Hubble Telescope. And everything is still, though, very calm as the Hubble Telescope and the Space Shuttle are moving farther and farther apart. The only words from Mission Control and Discovery, it was, Houston, Discovery here, step 1 complete. Roger, Discovery, very matter-of-fact, bringing to a close a day's long work of getting the Hubble telescope into orbit. We'll have more later. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live.
Things in the universe by a whole factor of 10 at one time. It's when Galileo first put the little telescope up to his eye.
Unhampered by the visual interference of Earth's atmosphere, the Space Telescope literally will be able to see back in time, looking at the light from galaxies that were evolving 10 billion years ago. Closer to home, the Space Telescope also will study our own solar system, offering views of Jupiter and Saturn and other planets similar to those captured by the Voyager spacecraft.
But Hubble's 15-year journey of discovery will provide a longer period for exploration.
We're kind of the Columbus folks in the modern times. And somebody said the other day when I was talking about this, gee, you know, you guys have a great new clipper ship to go exploring in, and that's really kind of the way it is.
While the Hubble Space Telescope will open new windows into space, that does not mean that the old windows opened by Earth-based telescopes will be closed. In fact, the Space Telescope will place more demands on existing observatories.
New avenues of research will open up as a consequence of what the Hubble Space Telescope will be finding, and much of that new work, these new directions, can be pursued from the ground.
In addition, there are some projects for which ground-based telescopes are more practical. Schmidt says his discovery of quasars is an example.
Quasars are exceedingly rare, so one has to spend a lot of time to find them. I don't think we want to spend time on the Hubble Space Telescope searching for a rare type of object.
The combination of the Space Telescope and its Earth-based counterparts may prove to be a partnership of almost...
of the Hubble telescope. Yesterday, the ground controllers at the Goddard Space Flight Center lost contact with the telescope briefly because of a mispointed antenna. They've had the same kind of problem, although they don't know why right now. In fact, we were supposed to be at this time watching the astronauts go through a student experiment, but instead that has been postponed to give the communications satellite over to the ground controllers at Goddard Space Center so that they can try and figure out why they are unable to establish contact with the telescope. Right now they're trying to work through that problem. It is a problem, and I don't want to make it sound more serious than it is. It's a problem something that they had not expected, but it's also something that they feel that they can work through. They think that they'll reacquire the signal shortly and that everything will be going smoothly with the shuttle schedule.
You know you make me wanna shout, lift my head up and shout, throw my hands back and shout, come on now, shout, come on now.
This morning's wake-up call for the 5 shuttle crew members was symbolic of the feeling of astronomers, technicians, and others who've worked on the Space Telescope for the past 20 years. They're cheering yesterday's successful deployment of the railroad car-sized observatory. Throughout the day today, Hubble controllers at Goddard Space Flight Center will be checking out the telescope's electrical and mechanical systems. They want to be certain that they have complete control of the telescope, are able to point it exactly where they want before the aperture door is opened. They don't want to take a chance on the telescope being pointed at the sun when the door is opened, because that would damage the sensitive scientific instruments on board. From their position 43 miles away, the shuttle crew could see the telescope shining in the sky.
It's coming into sunlight and it's reflecting like a very bright star right up ahead.
Fantastic. The shuttle, with its payload bay empty, has maneuvered to a station-keeping position 40 nautical miles away from the telescope. It will stay there on standby in case a problem develops in opening the aperture door. In the meantime, the crew members will be running through a handful of experiments, including a crystal growth experiment that's been run on several shuttle missions. In microgravity, near-perfect crystals can be grown. Those are used in developing designer drugs. There's also a student experiment on board. It looks at the effects of near weightlessness on electricity. From their record-high orbit, the shuttle crew's getting a good view of Earth and taking lots of pictures.
I know you're using the wide-angle lenses once in a while.
Roger, we're doing all kinds of stuff, a lot of wide angles included.
Of particular interest is the Rio Grande River area in South Texas, where there's been a lot of rain recently. The astronauts have been asked to see if they can get shots of flooding and silt deposits caused by the storm.
There is hail in San Antonio. Tornadoes reported in the vicinity of Kelly Air Force Base. Laughlin and Del Rio's 6,000 broken. Hondo's had 2.5 inches of rain the last hour. Austin has heavy thunderstorms now. So you ought to be able to get some good pictures of very high thunderstorms.
In fact, weather is also a potential problem on Sunday when the shuttle is scheduled to land at Edwards Air Force Base. This morning, Mission Control gave the shuttle crew some instructions on conserving some of their supplies in case a delay may be caused by weather. Of course, the shuttle plans on 2 extra days beyond the normal landing time period, and so there is not a concern there. It's just a precaution to be safe in case weather causes a problem later on. Bob?
Tony, you said NASA reports it has at least temporarily lost contact with the Hubble Space Telescope. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by contact in this case?
It is a complicated system that sends signals from the Goddard Space Flight Center outside Baltimore up to the Hubble telescope to get telemetry, to get data on exactly where it is, what kind of an orbit it's in, what kind of data is flowing back and forth from Goddard to a telescope, what we refer to as the TDRS telescope. It's the Tracking and Data Relay telescope, and onto the telescope. And so what we're having the problem with now, they haven't been able to make that contact, and so what they're doing is going around a different route to find out why they have lost contact and try and reestablish that contact.
All right. Thank you, Tony Clark. We'll continue to monitor the situation regarding the at least temporary loss of
the ground. Last night and then again this morning, they had problems acquiring the signal from the telescope, and though they have reacquired contact with the telescope, they are getting telemetry now. They want to understand what the problem was so that they can prevent it from happening in the future.
Controllers at the Goddard Space Flight Center spent the morning trying to reestablish contact with the $1.5 billion space telescope.
My speculation might be that we have some pointing error in the telescope that would allow us to be 4 to 5 degrees off of pointing to the TDRS satellite. And if that's the case, then that would explain why the TDRS is not receiving the signal from us.
TDRS is a communication satellite that links ground controllers with the telescope as well as the shuttle. This was the second time contact with the 12-ton observatory has been lost. Human error was blamed for the hour-long loss of contact Wednesday night, and though the cause of the second loss of contact wasn't immediately known, neither was treated as a major problem.
That's just a communication configuration problem. It means we don't receive telemetry, but switching back to the low-gain antennas would let us acquire telemetry back. And we could have, we could see what was going on with the telescope.
The troubleshooting forced a short delay in running a student-proposed experiment, looking at the effects of microgravity on electricity. This is one of a handful of experiments that the astronauts are performing while they watch over the Hubble Space Telescope from 40 miles away.
It's come into sunlight and it's reflecting like a very bright star right up ahead.
Fantastic.
In addition to keeping an eye on the telescope, the all-veteran crew is pointing its cameras toward Earth. Their record-high orbit is giving them a good view of thunderstorms rolling across Texas. And in less cloudy areas, Commander Lawrence Shriver says the view is spectacular.
I wasn't expecting quite this perspective on it, but got to stop and think about it a little bit, how high we are, I guess.
Yep, you all are way out.
The view is just so fantastic, we got to tell somebody about it.
NASA officials have mentioned some concern about possible weather problems when the shuttle is scheduled to land Sunday. Forecasters say the weather at Edwards Air Force Base may not be favorable, so the astronauts have been asked to conserve their supplies.
Of course, that's not a serious problem because the shuttle always carries enough supplies to last 2 extra days in orbit. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live.